The headliners, the newsmakers, the political scene, and government issues. These should be our concern, and we're taking you at the forefront. Good morning. I am Attorney Karen Jimeno. Join me at the forefront as we discuss the details of national issues that our country faces. The Philippine Coast Guard is in the midst of man-made and natural disaster threats in the last 3 days. A Philippine Coast Guard vessel was rammed by a Chinese Coast Guard vessel last Saturday in Escoda Shoal. As habagat and Typhoon Enteng brought heavy rains since Sunday, again, the PCG has been kept busy rescuing a ship burning near Navotas yesterday. Is the PCG up to all the natural and man-made challenges? We have with us this morning, all the way from Bataan. Joining us is Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson, Lieutenant Commander Michael John Encina. Good morning, Commander MJ.
Good morning, ma'am.
So let's start first with that incident in Navotas yesterday. Can you give us the details of why there was a burning vessel near Navotas?
Yes, the said incident transpired at about 7:30 a.m. in the morning yesterday. So we received an information that there is an allision incident between the motor vessel Camila and the LCT GT Express. So immediately, the Philippine Coast Guard coordinated with its maritime stakeholders to charter a specific boat and proceed to the said incident.
Okay, so when you say allision, what's the difference between that and collision?
Yes, when you say allision, there is a stationary vessel in which the other vessel is moving towards the said stationary vessel. So that incident makes us as well be able to respond into such incident.
So in this case, was there the cause of the allision? Does this have anything to do with the Typhoon Enteng?
Yes, actually, our initial investigation revealed that LCT GT Express is also anchored. So because of the strong current and the strong waves as well during yesterday, the said LCT rammed the MV Kamala.
Okay, and that caused the fire. This is why there was a vessel that caught fire.
Yes.
And were there any casualties?
No,
or injuries?
because the PCG immediately responded on the said incident. We've activated our quick response team to proceed immediately on the said incident area, or the ground zero. And we've rescued with the motor tag Philip Leyte 12 crew of the said vessel, MV Kamala, and then the other one was being rescued by a barangay in Navotas, in which they brought the said crew into Navotas Hospital.
Commanding General MJ, right?
Yes.
Commanding, is it correct?
Lieutenant
Commander MJ. During Typhoon Karina, there was also a vessel that capsized, but this was an oil tanker.
Yeah.
Was that also because of the typhoon?
Well, we didn't yet release the actual investigation. We call it maritime casualty investigation. Mm-hmm. So it is a contributory factor, the strong waves and the unfavorable weather condition during the course of its navigation. But we do not also discount the other possibilities that caused motor tanker Terra Nova to sink in the waters of Bataan.
With Terra Nova, because of it was an oil tanker, was there an oil spill because of its when it capsized?
Yeah, we cannot actually say it is an oil spill because we can say that there is an oil leak during the sinking of the said vessel. The PCG immediately activated its containment response. That's why this is a different case, unlike in Mindoro oil spill, in which there is a massive what you call heavy oil that is being seen in the coastal areas. But in this case, there is no incident or no sightings of any heavy oil seen in the coast of Bataan. The incident transpired 7 kilometers away from the coast of Bataan.
And because you were able to do your containment, there was no leak at all.
Yeah.
But how is that different from Mindoro? Why was there a big oil spill with Mindoro?
It is very, one of the contributing factors that we consider is the depth of the water in which the two vessels sank. Number one, in motor tanker Terra Nova, it is only 34-meter depth, wherein we can conduct diving operations with our technical divers, the PCG technical divers and the salvor divers. On the other hand, the incident in MV Princess Empress is 400 meters, which is impossible for a technical divers to conduct operations underground. With that being said, the PCG and the salvor divers were being able to immediately provide containment procedure underwater to check the valves, to check the pipelines for the leaks, so that we can provide intervention to immediately contain such leaks. Though we do not discount the oil sheens in the ground zero, such oil sheens is also being contained by the PCG vessel deployed in the area, and as well as with the Harbor Star, the salvor, containing capabilities.
So it's really the Philippine Coast Guard that responds every time there's a capsized vessel, and even if the consequences range from, for example, fire to oil spill, it's the PCG that is responsible for dealing with the situation.
Definitely, that is also our mandate as stipulated in the Republic Act 9993, the Philippine Coast Guard Law, in which the PCG is mandated to conduct maritime search and rescue operations within the national jurisdiction bounds of our country. So all of these maritime incident will be and should be responded by the PCG in a very quick and abrupt manner.
That oil spill incident in Mindoro, has everything been siphoned off?
Yes. Actually, there are no reports of oil spill or oil sheen seen in the coast of the Mindoro province. So we are hoping that this situation is also being under control.
Well, now that we have Typhoon Enteng, what is the PCG doing to ensure that the travel of vessels would be safe, that we don't have passenger vessels that would be capsizing and endangering people?
Well, under the leadership of our Commandant, Admiral Ronnie Hilgavan, he stipulated to us every time that there is a inclement weather condition that we encounter, is that we were going to practice the 3 Ps. Now, what is the 3 Ps? We call this the preemptive, proactive, and preventive measures. So for the preventive measures, we've been able to coordinate directly to the fishing boats, to the maritime stakeholders, because we can now predict the route of the typhoon. So with that preemptive measures, we've been able to at least minimize or mitigate all of the maritime incidents that might transpire. For the proactive measures, we are being coordinating with our MDRRMs, or the DRRMs, the Disaster Risk Management Office, for the lateral coordination with the updates of typhoon, what would be our contingency plans, and things of that nature. As well as we've been identifying all of the hot areas or the flooding areas that is possibly be affected by the said typhoon. So we are being able to provide forward deployment for that. And for the preemptive, we've been also conducting a forced evacuation to the areas in which we've also identified as flooding incidents. So those 3 Ps being practiced and being exercised by PCG during this kind of predicaments.
So even flooding areas that are not in the water, it's also PCG that monitors?
Yes, because we have capabilities in water search and rescue operations.
Okay. Yeah. So right now, can you give us an idea what are the hot areas, or I guess like the dangerous areas with Typhoon Enteng?
Well, as identified in Camarines Sur, we've rescued 67 individuals we've evacuated 67 actually. And last Sunday, we've also conducted an evacuation operation areas in part of Cavite, somewhere in Nai. So the prone areas are those areas have been considered to be one of the hot areas for this kind of operation. And others naman po, we've been able to at least organize and coordinate with the DRRMs for other possible forward deployments.
Is it also the PCG that gives advice with respect to commercial vessels? Like, for example, those traveling to the provinces, is it the PCG that says whether they can or cannot travel because of the weather?
Yes, it is in the jurisdiction and mandate of the PCG to hold a vessel, particularly if there is an impending inclement weather, if there is a tropical cyclone warning signal raised into the said area. But it is also under the capability of the PCG to prohibit navigation when it sees that the weather is not conducive for such.
Right now, has the PCG given advisory for commercial vessels not to travel, at least for those who were planning to go home to the provinces or travel somewhere? Is there now like a warning for those vessels not to travel?
Well, as issued by Pag-asa last 5 a.m. this morning, there is a tropical cyclone warning signal 1 and 2, some part of the northern Luzon. So we would advise all of the vessel not to conduct any voyage into that areas. The PCG in NCRCL, National Capital Region Central Luzon, also issued travel advisory or suspension of sails and voyage yesterday because we've been under the tropical cyclone warning signal number 1.
For those who own private boats, is the PCG also able to enforce restrictions? For example, right now with the inclement weather, for those who want to take their private boats out, will you be able to stop them from going out?
Well, definitely, yes. It is part of our mandate. All of the vessels transiting in the maritime jurisdiction of our country, particularly when we are faced by this kind of predicaments and inclement weather condition, the PCG will always provide guidance and at the same time prohibits this kind of activity.
Commander MJ, last question. You said that it's the PCG that's able to rescue when it comes to flooding incidents or that areas that are severely flooded. So will people be able to contact the PCG should they need rescuing during severe floods?
Yes, during such incident, our Coast Guard substations and stations are being pre-positioned and located particularly in the coastal municipalities within their jurisdiction, so they can definitely coordinate and provide details of the said operations, or even they can also coordinate with the RRMs, with their respective DRAMs, so that such DRAMs can also coordinate with us.
Okay, so there's really no hotline to PCG, but you can coordinate with your local barangay or the disaster risk management office in their area.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel MJ. And I hope that you have, enough support during this Typhoon Enteng to make sure that, you keep our country safe.
Thank you very much, Attorney.
Thank you so much. Up next is PCG spokesperson Commodore Jay Tarriela, live here at the forefront for the latest updates in the West Philippine Sea. Welcome back at the forefront. Joining us is another spokesperson of the Philippine Coast Guard, specifically for the West Philippine Sea, Commodore Jay Tarriela. Commodore Jay, welcome at the forefront.
Thank you, Attorney Karen, for having me.
Let's start first with this ramming incident between a Philippine Coast Guard vessel and a Chinese Coast Guard vessel last Saturday. Can you give us details of what transpired?
Well, last Saturday, the Philippine Coast Guard vessel BRP Teresa Magbanwa, it has been deployed in Escoda Shoal since April. Today, it's already at her 140th day of deployment in Teresa Magbanua in Escoda Shoal. The reason why she was rammed, it's because, as you can hear from the news, attorney, this has always been a subject of protest on the part of the People's Republic of China this month of August. They want the Philippine Coast Guard vessel to be withdrawn from Escoda Shoal. And despite of our, of our insistence that the Philippine Coast Guard vessel's role is not to be permanently placed there, but we're only conducting our sovereign patrol because Escoda Shoal falls within our own exclusive economic zone. But last Saturday, the Chinese Coast Guard, when we were about to move from one location to another because it's currently anchored in Escoda Shoal, the moment we heave up our anchor, meaning we took our anchor up, the Chinese Coast Guard carried out different dangerous maneuver. And by 12 noon last Saturday, the Coast Guard vessel was intentionally rammed by the Chinese Coast Guard vessel 5205. In a matter of 15 minutes, the Coast Guard vessel was rammed 3 times by this Chinese Coast Guard vessel.
So this was clearly an act of aggression directly from China, like when you said that this was a regular patrol by a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, but the ramming was not accidental. It was 3 times.
Yes, it was intentional, it is deliberate, and despite of our unprovocative actions, Teresa Magbanua is just lawfully patrolling our own exclusive economic zone. And this Chinese Coast Guard blatantly violated the international law and carry out such aggressive action.
We receive reports that currently BRP Magbanua is still at Escoda Shoal and now surrounded by around 30 Chinese vessels. Is this accurate? And what is the Coast Guard or the government doing to have BRP Magbanua safely back on shore?
That is accurate, attorney. BRP Teresa Magbanua remains to be anchored inside Escoda Shoal. It is surrounded by more than 30 Chinese maritime militia, at least 2 to 3 China Coast Guard vessels, PLA Navy tugboats, 1 Chinese hospital ship, and even 1 Chinese rescue and salvage vessel. If your question is, what is the effort of the national government? The Commandant of the Philippine Coast Guard, Admiral Ronnie Hilgavan, intends to deploy another Coast Guard vessel to carry out damage control on the vessel as a result of the ramming that they did. And hopefully to evaluate the seaworthiness of the vessel. And that will only be the time that we can decide whether if it's safe for Teresa Magbanua to sail back to Palawan.
U.S. Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson recently went to Twitter or X and quickly condemned the latest aggression of China in the West Philippine Sea. Does this carry any weight as far as the Philippines or China is concerned?
Well, on our part, for the Philippine government, we really appreciate the statements of not just the United States, but other like-minded states. The mere fact that these countries are standing up against the bullying activities of China, it has definitely a positive impact on our position in the West Philippine Sea. But if you're asking about how it affects the behavior of China, well, we cannot really tell, despite of so much aggressive action that we have exposed to the international community, and the European Union, the United States, Australia, Japan, and other countries have already expressed their condemnation and criticism against the unlawful activities of China. But as you know, China remains to be aggressive. China remains to carry out unlawful activities in the West Philippine Sea. So we still cannot say that it has impact on the behavior of China.
With EDCA, there have been recently joint military exercises between the Philippines and the U.S. Have you noticed that there's less conflict or less aggression once the military exercises started or when they're being conducted?
Well, that's a very tricky question, attorney. But you know, sometimes people are blaming that it's because of our active engagement with the United States that compelled China to behave aggressively in the past months and even years, right? But if we're going to compare it with the previous administration, wherein there is no active engagement with the United States, no balikatan exercises, no naval exercises with the U.S. Navy, but those harassment of the Chinese government remains to be the same. Filipino fishermen during those years were still being harassed. It is still difficult for the armed forces of the Philippines to do the resupply mission. At some point, we even experienced also the same thing, the water cannoning of the resupply boats. And the Coast Guard vessels remains to be bullied around even during the time of the previous administration. So I think it's a false analogy to say that the reason why China is behaving this way, it's because under this administration, we are engaging the United States for a military exercise.
Okay, so you would say that the aggression that our Filipino fishermen experienced before, during the time of former President Duterte and up to now, remain to be the same in terms of frequency and intensity?
Yes.
But right now, when we have the U.S.-EDCA agreement and joint military exercises, are there any exercises that relate specifically to the West Philippine Sea?
Well, not specifically in the West Philippine Sea. There are different areas that they do exercises, some of which are within our territorial sea as well. So, as I said, it is not quite accurate to say that it's because of all these military exercises that compels China to behave the way that they are behaving now.
In your opinion, the correct approach then, as you said, like, because there's really no difference if there's no aggressive stance, would you say that we should be aggressive in our approach when it comes to protecting and also laying our claim to the West Philippine Sea?
Well, Attorney, aggressive action is a very difficult way to describe our actions. With regard to the Philippine Coast Guard and the activities of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, I do not see at any way we can describe it as aggressive. As I said, our presence in the West Philippine Sea is in accordance with the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea and the 2016 Arbitral Award. Our vessels are, obviously and evidently smaller than the Chinese Coast Guard vessels. The number of vessels that we have in our inventory is pretty much so small compared to what they have. In terms of deployment, whenever we deploy one Coast Guard vessel, they would deploy 5 or even 10. So I don't see that the point that on our part we are being aggressive. It has always been the same. The Chinese government is the one who is carrying out escalatory actions and provocative behavior in the West Philippine Sea. The mere fact that they can deploy as many maritime forces as they like just to respond with the presence of one sole Philippine Coast Guard vessel, it's obviously, it is them who is aggressive. And we are just on the receiving end of such aggression.
President Bongbong Marcos has made a statement before that even if one death occurs in the West Philippine Sea, he will invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. Is there going to be any difference if this treaty is invoked?
Well, I don't want to really comment on the Mutual Defense Treaty, Attorney. That is something that has to be interpreted by the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of National Defense. But again, I would like to emphasize that the triggering point of the Mutual Defense Treaty to be invoked, as stipulated by the President, is a death of any Filipinos.
Okay. And right now, is the government doing anything to strengthen our protection of the West Philippine Sea or strengthen the Coast Guard itself, the Coast Guard and the Navy, in terms of number of vessels?
Well, for the capability building, President Marcos last year has approved the NED resolution for the acquisition of 5 more 97-meter vessels, which is to be procured in Japan. So the President, together with Senate and Congress, they have been very supportive for the capability building and even the substantial increase of our annual budget for the Philippine Coast Guard to be able to procure those items that are necessary for our patrol in the West Philippine Sea. And the same thing with the Armed Forces of the Philippines. President Bongbong Marcos has been very supportive of the modernization efforts of the AFP.
Okay. Commodore Jay, there were allegations before that you were fanning the flames of the conflict in the West Philippine Sea, and thereafter there was a gag order, which is why you suddenly became silent on this issue. Is this true?
No.
But before you answer that question, we'll have to take a short break. At the forefront, we'll be right back. Nasagot mo na agad. Welcome back at the forefront. Before the break, Commodore Jay, we were asking you, so there were allegations that before you were fanning the flames on the West Philippine Sea issue, and there was a gag order, which is why you became silent on this issue. Is this true?
Well, for both questions, my response is no. I'm not fanning the flames. Under this administration, the effort that we did in the West Philippine Sea since February last year is to be transparent about what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. Some of the pro-China trolls are saying that the exposure or being transparent about the West Philippine Sea is provoking China. But I don't think that is the objective of the transparency efforts. The objective of being transparent in the West Philippine Sea are basically two objectives. The first one is for the Filipino people to understand what is happening in the West Philippine Sea. With the previous administration not having so much information to provide to the Filipino people, it has been dominated by fake news and misinformation. So for this administration, President Bongbong Marcos believes that it is the obligation of the government to provide to the Filipino people what's really happening. And as a result of the surveys conducted, more Filipinos now are supportive of what we do in the West Philippine Sea. The second objective of that is for the international community as well to understand how China blatantly violates international law. And with a number of countries that are aware now, not just our traditional allies who have engaged the Armed Forces of the Philippines and even the Coast Guard to support our capability building and modernization efforts, and even the deepening security arrangement with other countries is also a clear evidence of the transparency efforts that we have been doing for more than a year. Regarding the question whether I received a gag order, the mere fact that I'm still here, exposing the Chinese aggression every time that they are doing unlawful and bullying activities in the West Philippine Sea, that gag order is not true.
Okay, so there's no gag order from the president or anyone from the government?
Yes.
Let's talk about the West Philippine Sea. A lot of the ordinary Filipinos sometimes have really an unclear idea of what this covers. Can you tell us what comprises the West Philippine Sea?
Attorney, you'll be surprised. I usually give talk to our youth about advocacy for the Filipino people to understand what is the West Philippine Sea. If you are going to ask any ordinary Filipino, where is the West Philippine Sea? They will also be surprised with the question and having difficulty how to describe where the West Philippine Sea is. So the West Philippine Sea basically is the western seaboard of our country. It starts from the northernmost up to the end point of Palawan. So meaning, from Batanes, the westward of it, down to Ilocos region, to Pangasinan, Bataan, Zambales, Mindoro, and Palawan, extended 200 nautical miles. That is the West Philippine Sea.
Okay, so it's a really wide
Yes.
area. And can you tell us what the core functions are of the Philippine Coast Guard? Because for me, even as a lawyer, I get confused between the Navy and the Philippine Coast Guard and what they do.
Well, Attorney, to simply put it, the Philippine Coast Guard is about maritime governance. Our core function, if you're going to read the Republic Act 9993, originally it is intended for maritime safety. That's why majority of the Coast Guard's powers and functions are pretty much focused on the maritime safety administration of our shipping industry. And then the second one is marine environmental protection. This is the reason why every time there's oil spill, there are issues for illegal fishing, degradation of the marine ecosystem. That's also the role of the Coast Guard. And then the third one is maritime law enforcement. Any violation of maritime laws that happens within our maritime jurisdiction is also subject to Coast Guard function. But nowadays, because of the West Philippine Sea efforts, most Filipinos are getting more confused about the difference why Coast Guard is the one patrolling the West Philippine Sea and not the Navy. Well, it goes back to the 2012 standoff during the time President Noynoy Aquino, when we were criticized then that we were militarizing the dispute because the Philippine Navy carried out fishery law enforcement boarding a Chinese fishing vessels that eventually resulted to a standoff. But since then, during the time President Noynoy, it was him who started the white-to-white ship strategy, wherein he doesn't want to militarize a dispute. And this has also been the regional norm among Southeast Asian countries. That's why you can see Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and even China developing their own Coast Guard capability and creating more Coast Guard vessels and deploying it in the West Philippine Sea. The same thing with the Philippines. We don't want to be put in that position again that we're criticized for militarizing the dispute. That's why Coast Guard vessels are deployed in the West Philippine Sea because one, they cannot criticize us for militarizing it. It's non-provocative, and the presence of white Coast Guard vessels is actually non-escalatory.
But when you say non-militarizing, does that mean that Coast Guard vessels that patrol don't have weapons, don't have ammunition? How is that different from having a Navy vessel?
Well, for the Philippine Coast Guard, our vessels and its armament is pretty much focused only in maritime law enforcement. We do not have naval ammunitions as huge or as enormous as the Philippine Navy. Our ammunitions on board are only limited to maritime law enforcement.
Okay, so Navy, how would that be different? They would have
Well, for the Navy,
larger firearms, or
in our definition of the mandate of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, basically that's it's their role for defending our territory. I've always been mentioning that the Philippine Coast Guard presence in the West Philippine Sea does not really replace or diminish the role of the Philippine Navy, because the role of the Philippine Navy can never be replaced by Coast Guard vessels. Because as I said, military's role, particularly the Philippine Navy, is about territorial defense. And that defensive role will always be for the Philippine Navy. And for the Coast Guard, we're just there to maintain our presence and to make sure that our position is strengthened by showing our flag, and for the Chinese not to say that we are losing effective control of our particular maritime feature.
well, Commodore Jay, the Philippines is an archipelago, so our waters are even larger than our land territories. Is the size of the Coast Guard sufficient? And how would you compare the size of the Coast Guard with the size of the Philippine Navy?
You know, Ms. Karen, when the Philippine Coast Guard was transferred away or separated from the Philippine Navy, the Coast Guard's manpower is only limited to less than 3,000 in 1998. But good thing that, the greatest contribution of former President Duterte to the expansion of the Philippine Coast Guard is that he allowed the Coast Guard to expand its manpower in response to the increasing number of Coast Guard vessels that were procured and during the time President Noynoy, and then delivered during the time President Duterte. President Duterte supported the idea of expanding the Philippine Coast Guard by saying that for every coastline kilometer, there will be one Coast Guard personnel. So right now, the Philippine Coast Guard is 30,000 strong, and our target by hopefully by 2025 or 2026, depending on our realization of our recruitment, to reach 37,869. meaning that's our ultimate goal, one personnel for every coastline kilometer. Right now, our manpower is bigger than the Philippine Navy.
Okay. And considering we have over 30,000 Coast Guards, and you mentioned that the function is also law enforcement in Philippine waters, would the Coast Guard have been the proper agency to have caught the boat that Alice Guo and Sheila Guo and Cassandra Ong, I think that they rowed to leave the Philippines?
Yes, supposedly. But you should also understand, attorney, that I would always describe this by saying a carnap vehicle, even if we already have established road traffic here in Metro Manila, is very difficult to find. What about the coastline kilometers of the entire archipelago? If I'm Alice Guo, of course, I won't be using a public port facility. Probably they can just, anchor somewhere near a coastline that is not publicly populated so that people won't be able to report them to anybody. So although it is true that the Coast Guard has the mandate to carry out pre-departure inspection of all vessels, for example, but that is always a possibility, considering that we have a very vast coastline. Alice Guo can rent a pleasure yacht or small boats to take them away in different places.
So that is very hard to patrol, like
Yes.
private boats, yachts.
Pleasure yachts, yes.
Okay, so how is the Coast Guard also helping when it comes to preventing smuggling, whether it's undeclared goods or even worse, like drugs, for example?
Well, the Philippine Coast Guard has a memorandum of understanding with the Bureau of Customs. We even have what we call the Task Force Aduana. It is a task force formed between the Philippine Coast Guard and the Bureau of Customs to support the Bureau of Customs in capturing those vessels that are subjected to bringing in smuggled goods. And the same thing with the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency. Coast Guard, we have Coast Guard K9, and most of our K9 are also trained in identifying narco substance that is prohibited under our law.
Have you caught any attempted smuggling of drugs?
Yes. In the history of Coast Guard K9, there are a lot of incidents that our Coast Guard K9 became very helpful for drug enforcement agency to counter drug smuggling.
Commodore Jay, thank you so much. So far, you've explained how the Coast Guard plays a role in making sure that you enforce the security in the Philippine waters. But how come we also see the Philippine Coast Guard in EDSA busways? So that's another question that we want you to answer. But before you answer that, we'll have to take a short break. At the Forefront, we'll be right back. Welcome back at the Forefront. Before the break, we were asking you, Commodore Jay, so it's clear that the Philippine Coast Guard secures and enforces in the Philippine waters. But how come we also see the PCG in the EDSA busways?
Well, that's a very complicated relationship that we have with the Department of Transportation. As you know, what I mentioned a while ago, the Philippine Coast Guard is originally under the Philippine Navy. And in 1998, before President Fidel Ramos stepped down, he transferred the Coast Guard to the Department of Transportation. So we have a different set of instructions from the department. So on those instances that the Department of Transportation would ask our assistants, for example, to deploy our personnel to support the traffic, or even to deploy our Coast Guard K9 in different bus terminals, even at the airport. So we don't have any other reason to make an excuse because the Secretary of Transportation is our direct boss.
But Commodore Jay, as it is, we were discussing earlier how much more water territory we have in the Philippines compared to land. And it's so hard to secure the territorial waters of the Philippines. That's why they call us very porous. So do you think that's a correct setup to have the Coast Guard also assist inland, meaning bus terminals and even the airports? Because I remember in COVID, it was also the Coast Guard, right, that was deployed for everyone visiting. So they were everywhere in the airport.
Attorney, the Philippine Coast Guard is a uniformed service, and we also have a long history of customs and traditions. And I think the most important custom that we still observe is we don't question a valid instruction or command from the chain of command. So as far as the Commandant of the Philippine Coast Guard is concerned, what the main reason why he is deploying our personnel in EDSA, in bus terminals, and even at the airport, it's because that is a valid instruction from the Secretary of the Transportation.
In your opinion, do you think this compromises the function of the Philippine Coast Guard, particularly when we have very important national security matters like the West Philippine Sea?
Well, in my own opinion, anything that the Secretary of Transportation desires supports our national interests.
Okay, well, that's like a very, an answer of really a person that's in service, like a service officer or commanding officer. But I suppose this is something that has to be fixed at the policy level, at a higher level. Thank you so much, Commodore Jay. Very, very important insights and valuable too.
Thank you, Attorney.
Amidst a combination of Typhoon Enteng and the latest Chinese aggression on the West Philippine Sea, the Philippine Coast Guard is unperturbed, as it remains steadfast in safeguarding the country's territorial waters. While the threat coming from Typhoon Enteng is momentary, the issue on the West Philippine Sea remains a puzzle to be solved. Be timely informed, be insightful of the news. Always stay at the forefront. Join us again tomorrow for meaningful conversations that would help you form an objective personal opinion. This is Atty. Karen Jimeno. Stay safe and keep dry as the rains continue to pour down this rainy Tuesday.